Hi everybody, I'm Grace Brubeck, and this is a series of conversations with the general theme of living from love. And today I have with me Bart Berge and Georgie Johnson from Israel. Hi Georgie. Hi Bart.
Hello.
Hi Grace.
And welcome to all of you who are watching. And the theme today is quite special, actually, to me and also to Georgie and Bart, in the sense that the theme of peace in Israel is obviously very topical. It's also topical for me, having grown up in Germany. At a time when the ruins from the Second World War was still very visible, and I grew up in a town that was bombed to the ground in the last few months of the war. So, peace somehow was always a very powerful theme for me, and it is for Georgie and Bart too, and actually they're offering peace meditations on Friday mornings. So I thought by asking you about those first, we'll start with something very practical and concrete today. So why don't you tell us about these meditations? You know, how you got started. And how you do these in this context. I also wanted to mention it's actually election day tomorrow in Israel, and it's
actually the day after tomorrow. Yeah, I was wrong. It's actually on Tuesday.
Okay. So it's the day after tomorrow, and it looks as if there could be some political upset in the in those elections. So it's an interesting time in Israel. So go ahead, Georgie and Bart.
Yeah.
You go first. You're living here.
We can talk about the peace meditations, but I'm really touched by what you say about Germany and these early atmospheres of your childhood, of the devastated town. And I'm wondering how you connected to peace as a child then in that atmosphere, because what struck me when you're speaking is that actually that was the declaration of peace inside that devastation. And I wonder how you would find peace in that atmosphere and how that would feel, and the different layers of peace which would have been there for that young girl.
Yeah, I can speak to that, sure. I guess I was a very sensitive child, and I felt a lot without being able to really put words to it. And seeing the ruins, and knowing that there had been a war somehow, but ruins are very evocative, and the knowing at the time was actually a knowing. It was like in my bones, and it was a knowing of war. It wasn't a knowing of peace. It was a knowing of the suffering of war, of the destructivity. I mean, that was very visible to me. And there was also a yearning for peace. There was a deeply felt yearning for peace. That's how I would describe it. A knowing of the suffering that is brought about by war, and the destruction, and a yearning for peace. So it was very factual at the time. I didn't have the mental apparatus to spin a story around this. So it was really just a very deeply felt thing for me. And it has stayed that way. You know, somehow I've never been able to put many words to this, even as I became more literate and wordy afterwards. But somehow this is so deeply felt that it's very hard to put words to it.
This word, the yearning, this yearning is a very beautiful word.
Mm.
And we certainly have here, I think, regardless of which side or which group or which population or religion, there is an incredibly deep yearning here also for peace.
Yes.
And quite commonly and quite typically we're programmed to try and satisfy our needs on the outside by trying to fix things, and or through the elections, or voting this way or voting that way, or fighting this war or making this compromise. It doesn't take the yearning away for peace.
Mm-hmm.
We could sign hundreds of contracts and peace agreements in Oslo, and the yearning would still be there. It might make it possible, it might give the space for people to go more deeply into what this yearning is all about. What is the yearning? What is it to really feel that inner missing? It's missing of something which we know it, because otherwise we wouldn't miss it.
Mm. Mm. And you know what strikes me, what is interesting, is that being European, having grown up in Europe, in Germany, I mean, you know, Europe was a war zone for centuries, thousands of years. And only after the Second World War has it been blessed with peace. Before then, it was just one long history of wars, and I hated history in school, because all we got to know about was this war and that war, and it was very old-fashioned kind of history teaching. And I wasn't interested in war. You know, it never spoke to me. I always knew that somehow that wasn't an option for me ever. Although, of course, you know, growing into a person, there was lots of personal conflicts. But the yearning of peace, you know, somehow when you live in a place that has been so saturated with war and conflict, the yearning for peace arises seemingly on the outside, you know. But actually, it's as if the outside conditions are just there to evoke that yearning in us. So that's how I would see it, and maybe you could speak to that a bit more in the Israeli context, in the Middle Eastern context, because, you know.
Yeah, but I think that's not only the Israeli context. I think we're talking about the worldwide context. And of course, right now there is a lot of war in this whole area.
Yeah.
But I think that the conflicts we see in the world are very much connected, or a reflection of our own inner conflicts. And part of why we're organizing the peace meditation here, in its structure, what we hope it's helpful for people to connect more to the depth with themselves in an area beyond duality, where they can find peace with themselves, inner peace. And the strange thing is when you get more in touch with this feeling of inner peace, which never gets lost. It's basically always there, but sometimes we lose in our conflicts in the mind and conflicts in the heart and fights with our emotions. We lose the connection with this beautiful place inside ourselves. And the moment we got this connection back, something strange is happening, even if it's war. We also are aware of the peace around ourselves, the peace of nature, and even sometimes the incredible silence and peacefulness of a battlefield. It's so contradictory, but also there is peace. So partly why we think it's important to kind of to meditate together as a group in Israel on peace is not that we want to force peace from the Middle East, because peace you cannot force. It's not something you can force. You have to be peaceful now. It's something we need to allow. And that's a different attitude. And meditation is a very, very beautiful tool to allow to be what already is. So that's a little bit of
Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Georgie?
So what we find ourselves saying every week, we talk a little bit first about peace in these meditations, and in a way we can't say it enough times. So really it tends to be always the first sentence. The peace is always here. It's not something which we can get. It's not something that we can control. It's not something that is in the future. It's not something in a different space. It's always here. In the same way that the silence of the mind is always here, even if we're thinking 1,000 thoughts, the silence is always here as well. In fact, the thoughts are born from the silence. So without the silence, there would be no thoughts at all. And yet there are people who really believe, and they say this, they really believe that there is no silence in their minds. There's only thoughts. They can't find the silence. So it's the same with peace. We get conditioned to believe that there is only conflict and war and doing and acting and getting and struggling and winning and losing. And that the peace isn't there. So there's an expression in Israel that there will be peace. Sheyeh shalom, that there will be peace. And so in a way it's a little bit like the donkey and the carrot. The peace is the carrot and the donkey is following, and it's always ahead, always in the future. So, and of course this is integrated through the whole culture. At the same time that the greeting in Hebrew is shalom, peace.
which means peace.
That's how you say hello. The greeting in Arabic is salam. This is how you say hello.
That's also peace.
And beautifully, all three languages also have Amen, which is so be it. So in a way, the real here, and I think everywhere, It seems everywhere. It's not between countries. It's not between communities. It's not between religions. It's between layers of suffering and delusion and conditioning, where nobody is really responsible at all. And this peace which is always here. That's why we say that surrender is the key movement. Even if you're in a battle between war and surrender, and you'll fall into the peace. And across the world, and now with the modern internet, we see this. People are becoming very, very deeply connected across countries because they're awake, because they're alive in the here, where there is the peace, in the now, because they're not buying the stories, not the stories of their own minds, and not the stories of the newspaper, not the stories of the tribe. And that seems to be the real evolution now, of people moving into awakening, who will stand, they really will stand for this peace which is always here, because there is enormous strength in something which has no beginning and no end, in something which is so given and so endless. Peace gets a bad name, doesn't it?
If you look at peace as something which can be forced, it gets a bad name. But if you look at something which is part of being human, or part of being alive in any form, and as a non-dual element, there is more conflict, and we think that the other side of that is surrender. So one of the difficulties in living in Israel is the amount of trauma which is built up, of course, at the Arab side of the population, but also in the Jewish side of the population. And this seems to go on and on and on and on. And when we look in the depth of trauma, it's like a rupture. People get a shock, and in this shock, there's a kind of rupture, and in this rupture, what's happening is kind of a narrowing of perception, of awareness, and then we start to move more into patterns of survival. And patterns of survival are always dualistic. It's you or me. It's not us together. And at the same time, if you want to release these patterns of survival, peace is such a beautiful means. It's basically to be able to release. We need to have some connection with peace inside ourselves, otherwise we are totally stuck. Or love, unconditional love, is another means for that. So that's partly why we think the work is to be done, is not kind of, to force peace or to win a war here, or who is right and who is wrong. This is all in polarity. This is not really, what helps. And so the politics right now are not really helpful. Also, this is in polarity. It's about who gets the power to, in his way or her way, will force the peace. And I think what's needed much more is a movement in which people are attracted to move more to the reality of life, the reality of themselves, into the here and into the now, which is contained by the here. and not fight against war, but open themselves for peace. So when we move back to these shocks, we all get in life, in which we lose sometimes part of the connection with the depth of ourselves, with our own essence, with the reality in ourselves. There is such an amount of work there to be done for all of us. And kind of what we see a mutual responsibility to try to stop the cycle of hurting, rejecting, damaging each other in a way that we get more and more polarized. And I think that's part also of history. Right now there is peace in Europe, but at least what I see, I'm coming from Holland originally, and one of the things Dutch people are proud of is the tolerance of the country. And what you see under the fear of the difficult economics right now, the amount of tolerance is going down, 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 down.
Yeah.
And it's not the fear, I think, which is the bad thing, because we're able to deal with fear more as we think we are. But it's the lack of self-confidence and the lack of trust when it gets difficult for all of us together, that we're together and that we're able to move together and to support each other. So, and that's again the polarization which takes place. If it's difficult, we move into survival, and it makes it more difficult because then we get less tolerant. We start to point. It's because of this. It's because of that. So that's a little bit what we, at least in the peace meditations, this part of our work, we try to talk about, and have different meditations to try to connect more deeply with inner peace.
I'd just like to maybe take something up that you mentioned. You said peace cannot be forced, which maybe, I don't know that resonates with everybody in terms of how they think of politics and peace negotiations and stuff like that, But what's certainly also true is that in the same way, peace cannot be created. I mean, it always is. So to think, I loved the title that you gave, that you sent for this conversation, which is Peace Has No Opposite. The opposite of war is surrender. It's strong stuff, and I wonder how politicians would respond to that. And maybe you have some experience with that, or maybe not. But it points to that as you said, as you pointed out yourself at the beginning, peace always is, and it cannot be created, because it is. The peace that can be created, the peace that can be made and that can be lost, the war that can be fought and that can be ended, is a duality that somehow doesn't really point us to real peace. Real peace has real peace simply is, and it has to be found.
Yeah.
Beyond those dualities.
Yeah.
So I totally, I find it incredibly courageous that you take this, you're so clear about this in a context where I'm sure a lot of people must say to you, you're totally crazy. How can you say that the opposite of war is surrender? Because that seems to be like, if you think of in terms of survival, in terms of duality, it's like either I win or I lose. That's what it gets translated as. So I wonder, what is your experience with this phrase? I mean, how do people respond to that?
What we try not to move into too much is into discussions with it.
Yeah.
Because, I think there is really such a deep yearning for peace here in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
It's really missing it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it's so strongly here as well. But people are missing the connection with it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're afraid and polarized. But the moment you bring forward things like peace is always there, the opposite of war is surrender, 1,000 fears starts to talk.
Sorry, I didn't catch
sorry.
that.
1,000 fears are starting to talk.
Yes.
This is not possible here because of this and this and this and this and this. And so we try not to move too much into politics.
Mm-hmm.
We're speaking out, but make it more individual.
Mm-hmm.
Because you each individual which finds a little bit more peace with himself makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think. You want to add something?
Yeah. It's more radical even than it sounds, because if peace is always here, as part of even of our consciousness, wherever we look, peace is a constant in our perception, then that means that unconditional to quiet or noise, unconditional to the choice to fight a war or to surrender, the peace is always here. Which means that it's entirely possible to fight a war and still be in connection with the peace.
Yes.
If we go through all our lives surrendering, we will become abuse victims. If we are so egoically attached with this idea of peace, one way or the other, we are going to lose connection with the real peace. Peace from the one side is something that some people in the structure of personality think they have to do, so they force it on themselves. And they force it on their anger, and they force it on their natural instincts, and they force it on their families. But it's not peace, it's control.
Yes.
From another side, there is a whole, and this is very strong in Israel right now, there's a whole reputation of peace, which it's for suckers, it's for softies, it's for the weak ones, it's for the lambs that go to the slaughter in the Holocaust. This is where peace leads us. This is the language. This is peace, the dirty peace, which is for the morons who would be ready to surrender everything and kill us all. So both of these dynamics are in a game with each other. For now, for maybe since Israel was born, or maybe throughout history, this constant twin trap. And the peace is watching it all. And when it breaks, and when the war is finished, the peace is revealed, also through devastation. And when there's a surrender, the peace can be revealed, if it's a genuine surrender. So I was thinking about the Israeli elections and about Gandhi. So this is one politician who really brought forward the art of peaceful war.
Mm-hmm.
And if we take this really to the local level, what's the essence of his message, and this is so important for living, is to know how to stand for the peace in yourself. Not against the form of another, not in the conflict, but to stand so strongly in your own peace that you come into a conflict, but you keep standing. So sometimes this is also necessary. This is necessary when we need to put a border, but the border we put is always for our freedom. It's a border in protection of our freedom, of our peace, of the peace. It's a border for our inherent existence. It's not a weapon thrown at somebody else. Because you are bad, you should be destroyed. Totally a different attitude.
Yeah.
And I've seen quite a few circumstances where people who are the most peaceful people are forced in their domestic lives into situations of war, and they don't have a choice, because or else if they don't stand, their children will be hurt. So these peaceful people, they'll be very peaceful for themselves and surrender everything, but when their children are threatened, then this comes forward, and then it's, okay, so I have to become evil, I have to fight a war. So then a whole kind of spiritual process begins where they understand that the truest expression of peace is to stand for their own integrity, for their truth, not against anybody else. You know, Mother Teresa said we are not fighting against, we are fighting for peace. No, we're not fighting for peace. What was I completely lost. You had a beautiful expression, it's going to come back.
Oh, you can throw it in when it comes back.
Yeah, I think we're not fighting against war, we are fighting for peace.
Yes.
We must fight for something and not against. That's the essence of it. To fight for freedom, not against the tyrant. It's a very big difference from the personal all the way through to the political.
Let me throw in a few things here. One is that Rick Archer has recently done an interview with somebody who is a Vietnam vet, who was in the Vietnam War as a very young man, and who was really into fighting. I mean, he volunteered to go to be drafted into the army, and there was one point where he actually said he used to experience total stillness being in situations of, you know, bombs flying, war actually happening in this very moment. But for him, the experience was that there was that happening, and also there was a sense of total stillness and peace with it all. And of course, the other reference, classical reference, is the Bhagavad Gita, you know, where Arjuna talks with Krishna about having to go into battle and kind of recoils from having to do so and to go into war against members of his own family, you know, his own relatives. And, well, you know, we know the outcome of the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, the same is pointed out that, and I was going to ask you about this, because for me, surrender is really at the same level as peace, actually. You know, surrender is what what allows peace to come to the forefront. Surrender is what takes us out of some kind of survival, some kind of resistance, back into peace. So, this is very different from surrender in a war. So, what I guess what this brings me to, which is really what interests me about this topic of peace, is it's obviously possible to be at peace, and yet, I don't know, I'd say to fight for something, but certainly to be very clear about the actions that need to be taken. And if the action is some form of war, then that may be what needs to be surrendered to.
Yes.
Surrendering to what is.
Yeah, surrendering to what is. Yes, there are situations like this, or at least we can imagine it. So it is like this. But if I speak for myself, I think this is part of our history, this is part of our daily life experience, maybe not in a real war, but in interaction with each other, standing for your own integrity and putting borders, or maybe kind of active reaching out. But it's always horrific.
Yes.
It's it makes very clear that if we hurt another and we are open in our peacefulness, integrity, and sometimes it's not a choice, and not because you really want to hurt the other, but the other will be hurt because this is how it is conditioned. It always hurts us as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is part of, partly what I see as the problem, is that it's very difficult to take the responsibility and to have the openness in how we stand in life, how we stand in the world, to take the amount of suffering and hurt, which is part of life, in. And so partly what we try to do is to push this suffering towards others and then not look. And so to take responsibility for your own pain and for your own suffering, and be able to move through that, or to allow it, or to surrender to that, gives freedom and a lot of self-esteem. And also is a highway to peace again.
Yes.
And so looking into that, we are working here also with people who are deeply traumatized. There is not so many people still alive who were in the Shoah.
In the Holocaust.
In the Holocaust. Yeah. So only the young people who were there. And there is also, but still in the second generation, you still see deep trauma coming forward for people who went to the Holocaust. And it's just an example because the Holocaust was like a war-type situation. And in every war is basically a Holocaust. Wherever. And in doing this work, what you see is that people often are split off inside themselves. It's like they took the trauma in from the parents, and not maybe sometimes directly, but sometimes by how through the damage of the parents, they were not really able to relate in a way which was needed to their children. And working with this, what you see is if we are able to connect to each other, really to this pain, and see that the pain which is in the world, the suffering which is there, the non-duality which is there, is the responsibility of all of us. And and this is part of my difficulty sometimes with spiritual people, not to kind of draw back from this and go inside your own bubble of bliss, which becomes a dream and a state. And when it's a state, even in enlightened people, it can bring forward also a lot of suffering again, because it moves into a polarity. I'm the one who's enlightened and you're the one who's suffering. It's not, and at least as how we experience this is not true. Enlightenment is in everybody, as suffering is in everybody. This life is a shared life. So that's a little bit where your question brings me in mind.
Do you want to add anything to that, Georgie?
Nisargadatta said to his students when they said, I found peace. He said, you say you found peace, but don't stop. And go further in. Go further into the peace. And this stays with me constantly. And peace isn't when Bart talks about states, a state of peace also is not the end point. It's not it. It's not arrival. A state of peace is a kind of frozen peace. And it can be quite worthwhile to move from our perception from a state of peace and to channel that state of peace. But it's still not the end point. And when we go into the feeling of peace, when there is a peacefulness, and really begin to allow it, blending with it, merging with it, in such a way that it's allowed to be way beyond anything that our minds or our bodies would ever need to contain, we begin to notice it's very, very, very alive. It's got a million colors. It's almost got a million tunes of harmony. And it's not an end point. Because there is one that's moving into the peace. There's one that's always behind that, which is even unconditional to the feeling of peace. Because the feeling of peace is an effect of peace. How do we know peace? We know peace by a feeling of lack of war, the end of a conflict in the first instance, or sometimes space where we're not entangled anymore. Secondly, we know it by a feeling of relaxation in the body, that the mind can come to quiet, that the nervous system relaxes. These are all the effects of peace. It's not peace. You know, if the nervous system stays relaxed for a very, very long time, medicated, this is not peace. It's a frozen affective peace. You know, and so there is this ability to jump when we recognize the effects. So we can feel that we can move into a peaceful environment, for example, into a synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
There are such synagogues in the world, not so much in Israel, but in Czechoslovakia, which are full of peace. In Prague there's one. And you can feel this incredible otherly, universal sense of peace coming down. But what we're feeling is like the wind blowing through the trees. You know, we feel the effects. So the wind is blowing, and we can hear the wind blowing, whistling, the sound of the wind. We can see it because the clouds are moving and the trees are moving. But we wouldn't say that the movement is the wind. We wouldn't say the sound is the wind. Well, we would say that's the sound of the wind, but it's not the wind. And if there wasn't obstacles there, the wind would be just blowing in it. Well, the wind would be still, actually.
And that's
so this is the source of
that's
peace.
Where we want to go.
And this is not out there, it's behind consciousness, it's behind even any experience that we could ever have. It's the source of that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I mean, you know, the just as the yearning for peace is a state, so the experience of peace is a state that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, as Buddhists would say.
Yeah.
And so it is still part of the phenomenal world.
Yeah.
As such, it cannot be true peace, real peace. As you say, it's like a felt expression of that peace. It's a felt experience of that peace. But it isn't in itself that peace.
Yeah.
And yet it has a tremendous value because, for example, the memory of peace, the memory of a time when we are at peace, it triggers to the body in a way the opening to that, which is before even the impressions left by peace. The symptoms of peace, like the symptoms of a disease, will lead to, and of course it's not a disease, it's the opposite, but the imprints show the way back. And I think this is partly what Nisargadatta meant when he said, don't stop, go further, allow more.
It's the same, I mean, you know, it's the same with, you know, experiences of bliss or of joy or of, you know, anything that is felt can also go away again. I mean, that's the nature of anything, any experience that is a felt experience. So that can't be ultimately what we're yearning for. And I have to say, you know, for myself, for the longest time, I was in that confusion. You know, it's really only when I became aware of that which is beyond all experience, that I could make the difference between the peace that is felt, experienced, and the peace that simply is. And as long as there was that confusion, I notice now also that there was an attachment to peace.
Yes.
You know, there was an attachment to nonviolence.
Yes.
And a converse attachment against conflict and against war and against anything that would be forceful. And it's interesting because I find that I've given that up. You know, it's like it's like I see the place of both. And of course, most of the time I would choose what is nonviolent, what is peaceful, what is furthering peace rather than war. But I see also that there can be a place for that which is forceful, for that which is even which is war.
Yeah.
And that feels like a big thing to say, but that's what I have come to in realizing that in this realm of dualities there will always be both.
Yes.
There's no avoiding that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to take responsibility for both.
Mm-hmm. And what does that look like for you in the context of Israel?
I'm just going to go for 2 seconds and I'll be back again. I leave you with...
Okay.
Basically, in our talk together, we're coming to a depth which most Israelis don't think about, not relate with this inside themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, how could they if it's not their experience, if their
exactly.
experience is limited to duality?
Yeah. And so most Israelis very much are into duality, but so much yearning for peace, and so much want to do the best thing to get peace. And what you see in Israel is that people are losing trust that it will ever happen. And there's a lot of despair. And there's a group of people, they say whatever is needed to break this situation of horror, let's do it. Even if we have to leave, if we have to go. And there is a group of people who say, okay, if we don't find the solution, we will force a solution. And what you see right now in Israel, between these two groups, there is a big tension. And it's not as extreme. I go to both extreme sides, but one is more to this side and the other is more to that side. And there is a big tension going on. So that means that not only there is not a lot of peace between Arabs and Israelis. I said not a lot because there is also peace. Happily enough, our neighbor town is an Arab town, and when we go shopping there is peace also between us. But there's also a loss of peace between different groups of Jewish people and different groups of Muslim people. And this is what you see in the whole Middle East. And right now there seems to be something in the energy kind of, to bring this forward more and more violent. And I think it's a little bit, when things get too bad, it's like sometimes we're forced inside and we find this place as well. It seems that we often also in our lives have to go to positions where we're not able to follow old patterns of survival anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's frightening at the same time.
I'm going to throw in something that I experienced when I was visiting Malaysia a long time ago, over 25 years ago. And at the time, there was a lot of social conflict between the three ethnic groups in Malaysia, the Malays, the Indians, and the Chinese. And, a lot of conflict, a lot of survival stuff happening. And at the same time, there were these open food courts that people would assemble in the evenings, and there were stalls by all of the ethnic groups, and they would offer their ethnic food, and everybody would eat everything. There was and people who came were from all ethnic groups. So there was there were these places and these contexts where somehow the three groups that were so in conflict with each other a lot of the time were actually able to just be with each other and enjoy what they had to offer, each in their unique way, in their cultural culinary tradition. And I was just very struck by how that could be possible, and at the same time, yet there was such social conflict. And it's like, somehow there seem to be contexts, that can be very everyday contexts, living contexts, where it's possible to not be in that duality of myself and the other, but to actually be in a sense of shared humanity that links us all, and that allows us to actually appreciate and celebrate the differences that are there, rather than find them threatening and needing to assert our own interests against those that we think are other. And what you're describing about the Arab town and where you live is a bit the same thing. There seems to be a living context that actually is quite peaceful and quite, where there doesn't seem to be an obvious problem.
Yeah. And that's in big parts of Israel as well. That we can. What? That's in big parts of Israel as well, that we can really enjoy difference in culture and food. It's there as well. You can totally compare it to Malaysia, what's happening. You have the human factor, which is there. The moment you meet another human, we recognize whatever background we recognize for.
Yeah.
And you have the ideas, and which is generalizations. It doesn't fit on, how people in Israel are looking at Muslims, the Jewish people. When they meet a Muslim, it's a good Muslim, because it doesn't fit the picture. But still, as a collective, we move according this kind of crazy pictures, which are based on fear and trauma, basically. But I don't think it's real. And the more our system is able to relax, especially when we're eating, the more we can feel at home with people from whatever background. And I think this is something worthwhile to invest in. Now you want to say something.
Maybe you need to add a branch to your
Yes.
peace meditations.
Exactly. Cake, coffee, tea, and
Yes, Georgie, you were, sorry, I interrupted. You were going to say
That's no interruption. But it is, there's a deep, deep, deep unity in humanity. It's one humanity. And, we have 7 children. And when I was struggling as a mother with the first 3 that were born, one after the other, they were killing each other, screaming, shouting, hitting, and I was in the kitchen. And then, of course, children, one moment they're fighting and screaming like Satan itself at each other, and the next moment they're playing happily and they're running and all of this. And I was in the kitchen, very, very nervous, getting more and more stressed and more tense. And I remembered how it was with my brother when I was little, and we were killing each other. And my mother was the one quivering in the kitchen and holding onto the counter to keep standing. And I remember how it was for me as a child. I was really enjoying that. We really enjoyed fighting. The only problem there was my mother, who got so stressed by it. And this relaxed something in me completely to be able to be in peace while the children go through this part of their development. But there is this basic misconception that it's possible to reject another person or another country or another religion, that rejection is even a possibility from the depth of shared humanity. So when we go to war, and when we're indoctrinated into believing in war and fighting a war, it's under this illusion that actually it's possible to get rid of the other. That we can make the Arabs go away. We actually saw in the Gaza war cartoons on Facebook going around of Gaza being sawn off and taken across the sea and dumped near the White House.
Or in Canada.
Let's see how you like it. So we have this belief that it's possible to destroy the other. We also have the belief that in fighting a war, we're making a difference between ourselves and the other. So it's really important to check these belief systems in the mind, because what you actually see, for example, with the Holocaust, where there's been the most atrocious clash based on genetics of 2 peoples. It doesn't matter who's good and who's bad. This is really not the point, because the Holocaust is a shared energy of both peoples. It didn't belong to one or the other. Just as the energy of murder belongs to the victim as much as to the murderer. It's not belonging to one individual. Both are exposed to it. And in a way, there is an incredible intimacy there. It's like a marriage. And we see that now, decades later, that Germany and Israel are still in this dance together. In a way, in the world of form, there is a very, very special relationship and a deep intimacy there between the people of Germany, 2nd generation, 3rd generation, and the Jewish people. And there's a shared process still going on and a shared learning happening around that. And I don't think it began with the Holocaust, but when we move into a conflict with another person, we are moving into intimacy. We're not moving because we don't like them, we're moving because we really are attracted into an entanglement. If this could even be allowed, that in fighting one's ex-husband, one's actually going through another stage of intimacy, then there would be much more responsibility in it. And the way to allow this game that we play, these games that we play, is always to step out of the box, because they are always in local rooms, local playrooms, playing fields, sports grounds. And we need to be able to step out of it and to see what is there for real. So we step back from it into consciousness which is not identified, or into a shared awareness of this shared atmosphere which is there. And From this position, we can make peace with what is happening. So I can make peace with myself in this conflict with this other person in a conflict. And how can I make peace? I can allow the total unity which is there, irrespective of the two persons who are negotiating a conflict of form, of where you put the fence between the houses, and of what color the roofs are in the neighborhood. So this doesn't say anything about the humanity of the people behind, of the existence, of the one existence. So when we make that connection, which is a connection totally beyond duality, like in the world of peace, the person is freed to move in a kind of much more natural negotiation. Even if we have a conflict, a war that we have to fight first, and this is Chinese warfare, first you have to accept what is. You can't fight a war from the position of rage inside it of one of the soldiers. You have to really accept the whole of what is.
Yeah.
Including your own emotions and the woundedness behind that, or the need behind that, or the fear. All of this is empowerment. It's not the opposite. But at the same time, this is a movement backwards into peace, because from peace, the peace is always there. The peace allows unconditionally what is. It's not in conflict with conflict, even.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. You see very much, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking of the Dalai Lama and Tibet and the deep engagement with China and the way the Dalai Lama's leadership is moving the Tibetans through this. It's such a beautiful example also. He's not surrendering. He's not saying, hey, take my country, destroy it, kill my people. But he doesn't lose connection for a moment with the compassion, which is born of the unity. And it creates a man who they thought they could destroy him and banish him, and he becomes the size of the planet. He becomes all of humanity watching.
Yeah.
This is an enormously powerful example of how to move with peace in conflict. And again, the different battle lines. There was one Tibetan monk who was in captivity for years in China, tortured. He came back to the Dalai Lama and they asked him, what was your greatest fear in that time? Was it that you would die? Was it your family? What was your greatest fear? And he said that I would lose my compassion for the one that was torturing him.
Yes.
There's such a profundity in that, because when he lost his compassion, he would lose everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean compassion in the sense of, a mind thing or a superior thing. It's being in this together, the interbeing, the shared pool, the shared connect, allowing the connection which is always there, regardless of the forms. Compassion is being together in passion. Passion, as a word, is the same thing as suffering. The passion of Christ. So in a way, the word compassion is allowing the unity which is there in suffering.
Shared suffering.
And the realization that, really, as long as there is war, as long as there is conflict, peace is not fully realized. Not deeply, just as long as there are people who are not awake to their own true nature, we're not fully realized.
Yes.
It takes all of us to wake up for awakening to be true, fully true.
Yes.
And in the same way, it takes all of conflict to cease before peace is fully realized. And I don't know that will ever be possible on this planet. I have no idea, but
No.
you know, that's what it appears like to me, that somehow that that's where the suffering is in conflict. You know, even if one side of the conflict is at peace, you know, there's still suffering on the other side, so there's still suffering.
Yes.
So peace is not fully realized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this births an interesting phenomenon, which is that when an individual begins to realize peace in their lives, one of the first effects can be that others around them start to attack,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which can be terrible. They find themselves a few years after awakening or after a satori in situations of extreme conflict with psychopaths.
Well, you know, it's like that peace will be tested. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what everybody faces, you know, in one way or
Yeah.
another, don't they?
Yeah.
Mm.
But it's also where peace becomes the service. Part of the service of living there, and also part of the joy of living.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's also where peace becomes, you know, where the awake beingness becomes more embodied, you know. Embodiment is a big word, this kind of concept these days, but it really is. I mean, it ultimately, because we are in a body, there is this movement of things becoming more and more, you know, shining through the physical form, shining through the actions, the interactions with others. And there's huge change in patterns that happens that way. And that's how it radiates out. I mean, that's how it's caught by others too.
Yeah.
You know, if it weren't so embodied, it wouldn't radiate. It wouldn't communicate itself.
Yeah.
It's interesting that one of the main areas where we tend to have a conflict is with our own bodies, with being physically here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very beautiful that you say make the connection between peace and embodiment.
Yes. Actually, for me, the most striking example always is how we are with others, you know, in our day-to-day relations with others. I mean, that's another form of embodiment that speaks volumes. I certainly know that, you know, peace is not always there in my day-to-day life. More and more, but you know, it's taken a long time to shine at those levels.
Yeah.
And it's still, you know, it's still kind of moving more and more into being a reality at that level. Yeah.
It's interesting how that works. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So I wonder whether this would be a good point to kind of maybe open things up to others, in terms of others, those who are watching. if you'd like to ask a question. You can do so on the YouTube comment thread. You can also come into the Hangout, join us in the Hangout to ask a question live or to comment as you wish. The link for joining the Hangout is on the Living from Love website on the homepage, living-from-love.com. You'll find two links, one for watching, one for joining the Hangout. And if you click on the link for the Hangout, this will take you into the Hangout. As long as you have the Google Hangout app. But if you don't have it, it will want to download it. So maybe I'll just take a moment to look at the YouTube comment thread, and I'll let you know what people write on it there, and we'll take it from there. Usually takes people, because there's a little time lag between our real life Google Hangout and the YouTube broadcast. Usually takes just a little bit of time for people to respond. So please feel free to, and I'm just going to have a look at what I find there. So so I invited people to let us know where they're joining us from. And Wendy says she's here in snowy Canada. Yes, we had about a foot of snow in the mountains there, north of Canada. She says, such an important topic for today's conversation. I look forward to it. Rolf Van Fleet says, hello, I'm joining from, I have difficulty with Dutch pronunciation.
Somewhere in Holland.
Groningen.
Groningen.
Nice to join in, Mirjam. So it's obviously not Rolf, or maybe both. And Inge says, nice to see and hear you. She's joining from Holland too. And Aninia says, thank you, Grace, for making this possible for us. Love joining from Finland.
Wow, nice.
Yes.
Beautiful.
So I'm just going to refresh to see whether there's anything else. Yeah, that's it for now.
Too much peace.
Yes, too much peace.
You see how it works.
No questions.
We're missing some Middle Easterners. They would have questions always.
Yes, they may not, because this is an English YouTube page. I'm not sure that they can actually, they'd have to feel comfortable writing in English, which I don't know if they would, which is too bad, I mean.
That's a pity. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a story of an Israeli who is on a ship, and he gets shipwrecked, and he goes to a desert island, and he immediately starts to build 2 synagogues. And then they come to rescue him, and they ask him, why did you build 2 synagogues? And he said, this one is for me to pray in, and this one I will never step into in my life. So we are missing the Israeli spirit here on the question columns on YouTube.
Yes.
There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of joy in celebrating many different forms, and sometimes it looks like conflict.
Yeah. Well, since there's not a question yet, let me ask you a question, which I have for you, which is, you know, Bart, you're from Holland. Georgie, you're from the UK originally, although you've lived in Israel for a long time. Do you feel that you're being non-Israeli, non-Jewish, non-Arab? Oh, sorry, this is wrong because of course Georgie converted to Judaism. Sorry about that.
Not
So,
this, not this. You can just say being not anything, unconditional not anything.
The question basically is, do you feel that gives you maybe a more a perspective that's maybe more able to be unattached compared to those of you know, Israelis, Arabs, Jews, Muslims?
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't mean that I care less, but there is less attachment in the form of culture, in the form of background, in the form of indoctrination, in the form of bringing up. It really gives kind of freedom to look with different eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, but again, it doesn't mean that I care less or are less passionate about the situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
for sure, it makes it more easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do see there's a comment. Aninia says, I joined a little late, but I enjoyed all what Georgie said. Hold on. Had trouble hearing what Bart said. Thank you both. I'm not sure. Maybe you guys could give me some feedback whether that's a general thing that Bart is difficult to understand. There is a question from Gail. She says, I tuned in late, I may have missed this. In Georgie's book, she has information about revolving Torah's energy. Could she speak on this and how it connects us all? Thank you. Excellent. It's going to, maybe you should just say something very quickly about a torus, because I don't know everybody's aware of that concept.
You know, we live in, we perceive through 3 dimensions, in a 3-dimensional world. Our whole perception is based in the first degree when it comes through the mind, or is reduced to 3 dimensions. There are known to be many, many other dimensions. The torus itself is a revolving cylinder which is hollow on the inside, and what was on the outside becomes inside, and what was on the inside becomes outside, in a constant evolution, revolution. It can be hard for us to visualize that. It's in a constant movement through and of itself. It's a mathematical structure. In relation to the subject we're talking about, which is points beyond, which is peace beyond duality, this whole structure, and now we're talking beyond the physical, we're talking on the energetic level, is just a form. It's a form in movement. The whole universe is a revolving torus spiraling through space at actually a very fast speed in itself. This is all beyond our minds, but there is something which is immediately here now, which isn't a form, which is completely easy to grasp, which is in every detail between and in and supporting things like this energetic movement of the revolving torus. The revolving torus is a perceptive field, it's of awareness. But both awareness and consciousness are supported by something much more constant and much more of a continuum, which is always there, also when we're unconscious, also when we're not in time, also when we're not in space. It's there also when we are totally unenlightened and behaving like crazy people or in emotion. And it's there when we are the Buddha at the gas pump, when we are totally in a satori. It's the same. It doesn't get changed according to experience or to our state of being or our state of perception or even the state of the torus, because it is the whole support of the torus. This is where the direction to go. I don't know what her name was, but don't look for the form, look for the space between. And then the torus will come forward of itself, but it won't be so interesting anymore because the space between every particle of experience is so much more it.
Okay, thank you. So there's another question from Maria Victoria, who comes from Spain, who's watching from Spain. Can you explain the connection between peace and truth? You said peace is not fully seen.
That's what she said, that we said that peace is not fully seen. Nice.
Yes. So as truth is not fully seen, peace is not fully seen, and we talk. There is a lot of different layers of and experiences and dimensions of peace, as there is a lot of different layers and experiences and dimensions of truth. And we all perceive in our own way truth. And basically, each truth of each person is unique as we look upon it. So the question is there something which is behind it, which is an ultimate truth? Yes. But then moving into this ultimate truth which is behind it, we also move behind perception. And we move into the unperceivable and unknowable in a way. And then again, the moment we bring this back into form, and this is the only truth we can express and connect to, it's our truth again. And I think we cannot generalize it. We cannot force truth upon others, as we cannot force peace upon others. So in this way, they go right to the essence and beyond the essence, both truth and peace.
And in the end, the gap will always close. It's never something you see. It's never something you feel. It's something, it's possible to fall back and be that. The truth doesn't see itself. I mean, it can see itself reflected in 1,000 different forms of creation as a reflection, but truth, it will not. The moment it reflects back on itself, it's looking at a reflection. You can be that. You can be it. Peace is actually the same. The greatest surrender is when you allow yourself to just be peace. But you don't know anymore that you're being peace. This is the process of embodiment. You don't say, oh, look, I'm embodying peace, because it already happened. It's there. You can be peace. And this is about allowing, because when we allow, we open that channel to be that. But the moment we take the mirrors and we say, oh, I'm embodying, I'm being it, I'm this, and it feels like this, and it has this impression, we're already disconnecting again and closing down the channels.
Yeah.
It's a fine art. And we're not claiming to be peace and truth all the time at all. But sometimes. And what's beautiful is that what you can see is that the nervous system gets used to it. And so over a long period of time, it becomes, like you said before about the peace, it gets integrated. But not in a way that it's shocking or anything, because it happens without you knowing it, like getting older, but you become increasingly more it. And now and again you can look backwards and see where you were, and it's like almost really a different species 15 years before. The physical moves slowly.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And there's a comment from Gail. Says she's the one who asked the question about the Torahs. She says, yes, like the space between the breath. Thanks, Georgie. And Inge says, I really enjoyed listening to you all. I'm going to my inner peace in dreamland now. Thanks to you all.
Sleep well.
Yeah, so it looks like there aren't any more questions. So maybe, since it's quite late in Israel too, we'll bring this conversation to an end. And I'm just wondering whether there's something. Sorry. Well, there's something that you'd like to, that's still burning to be said, that you'd like to add to what we've talked about.
There is one thing.
There's one thing for Georgie.
There is really one. Creation is all about the splitting into dualities, in which the unity is never lost, but division. Creation is seen most negatively, it's a trauma. Seen most positively, it's a celebration of the manifold of expression. One of the first splits in creation is between the male and the female aspects. And wherever you see a culture in crisis and in conflict, we also see this split playing out, often with a lot of violence. We see the war between the man and the woman. This is happening across the Middle East, not only in Arab countries, also here in Israel, among religious communities. It's been part of the dynamics of conflict, and nobody calls this a war. But it's been part of one of the chief dynamics of our century, and it still goes on. The balance between male and female, where they become one, is probably one of the most incredibly beautiful doorways of peace. When we move beyond this polarity. For example, if we take the male aspect as being assertive and the female as receptive, the movement. When we move beyond movement, we find the stillness which is always here. It's in order to find a opening to peace, a really wide and rich peace within ourselves, it's important to realize the male and female aspects within ourselves. And how does this happen? It happens because we become aware of both. It's that simple. We allow both on all the levels. And in the allowing of both, the awareness is already beyond the polarity. That which can feel both. And out of this can rise or fall, or both, a tremendous peace. Yeah.
Would you say that's true of all polarities, or do you feel that's particularly true of the male-female polarity?
I feel that the male and female polarity is interwoven through all polarities. For example, now we have a world which is doing, getting, active, outside. And there seems to be a shift happening in the past decade back to the receptive, back to the allowing, back to the journey inside. So the active and the receptive we find through all the realms of polarity. You know, take shame. The feeling of shame is receptive of a certain kind of frozen energy, painful energy. But it's in a polarity with disgust, which is where we take the same shame and we throw it at the other. We throw it outside. The shame, we take it inside. The disgust, we throw it outside. It's the male-female polarity. So it seemed important to mention that because in the end, if we're talking about non-duality, we are really talking about a story of peace, in which love is that which is the engine that brings the peace, and out of the peace, the love is born again into form. And that's again the Torah movement of the return and the rebirth in living. Yeah.
Well, that's a beautiful way to end, because as you know, love is the overarching theme of these conversations. So to link peace back to love is feels like a beautiful place to end. So thank you so much. Thank you so much
for Grace.
Having approached me. And when I was looking at doing a conversation, I just felt very strongly drawn to this theme of peace, and we actually explored all kinds of possible themes before I kind of threw in the peace. And I'm so because it was just not there before, and I'm so glad we talked about peace. It's been really, really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. It was really a pleasure.
Yes, it's a pleasure meeting you, and like I said, it's a very meaningful topic to me. And just to say, there's many thanks from people, from Maria Victoria, who says beautiful things, and Wendy, who says, thank you so much, Georgie and Bart. This was the most beautiful sharing. Love to you both. And Aninia says, wow, really thank you, Bart and Grace. I subscribe to your YouTube account. I'm not quite sure which one. You can subscribe to both accounts, Georgie and Bart's and my own. And Gail says, thank you all for the connection and love. So
beautiful. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you again. And just to say, if you enjoy these conversations and you feel moved to make a donation, I'm very grateful for donations to keep things going. You can do so on the Living from Love website. And the next conversation will be in a week's time with Jeannie Zandy, with whom I will speak about relating as love. So it kind of goes from the macrocosm of war to the microcosm of, individual relating. So it kind of connects nicely. Thank you to all for listening, and thank you again to Georgie and Bart. And we'll see you again soon.
Yes, see you. Bye bye.